Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how to protect newly planted trees from rabbits. That's up next. Hello everyone, this is Dwayne with Edge of Nowhere Farm, and we're coming to you here today. It is April 2020. So for those of you who follow us on a regular basis, you know we are right in the middle of planting as many fruit trees as we possibly can, and we have some experience doing that. So on our old farm, we had just over 100 fruit trees that we put in the ground and had a great harvest off of a lot of those trees. Now we're starting on this new piece of land, and we've got, I think, 35 or 36 trees in the ground so far, a lot more to go, heading towards 150 plus. I've had a lot of questions over the years on how you protect a newly planted tree, specifically from rabbits. So here in Arizona, we have little cottontails. Out here we also have some larger rabbits, but Indian cottontails are really kind of what we're going after as far as protection for these newly planted trees. Now, one of the things that we found on the old property, and we're finding here as well, is the cottontails like to come up and nibble not only on the leaves themselves, but also on the trunks. Now the leaves, not such a big deal. However, the trunks, that's a problem because they will very easily girdle the tree, which is basically take all of the bark all the way around a tree, pull that bark off, and then you got a problem with that newly planted tree. In fact, it's probably gonna die. In fact, if it's girdled, it will die. So at least when the trees are small, we need to make sure we're keeping rabbits away from the trunk of the tree until the tree is big enough to basically fend for itself. So we've tried a couple different things, but we have one thing that definitely works fantastic for those little cottontails and keeping them away from your newly planted trees. So let's go ahead and show you what we're gonna be using and the tools we're gonna be using today. Okay, so we found the easiest thing to do is actually to use some of this garden fencing. Now we call it rabbit fencing because obviously that's what we use it for, and we got this at Home Depot. I want to say they actually call it rabbit fencing as well, but either way it's called garden fence. What we like about it is it's gradient. Either way, you've got smaller spaces or smaller gaps between the wires down at the bottom, larger ones at the top. The picture on the front of the package shows a rabbit as well, so you can tell this is definitely made for that. So you're going to need to get some type of fencing. Now you can use chicken wire and other things, but we found that this holds up really, really well. It is galvanized, so it's going to last a lot longer than the vast majority of other things you might use. It's actually pretty thick, so we haven't had an issue with it. Ultimately, this one works great. Also going to need some stakes. You will be staking this into place. Now we're going to use bamboo stakes today. We like those because obviously they're sustainable as opposed to the metal and plastic stakes, but the reality is it doesn't matter what you use. You just want to have something that will help hold this in place. You are going to want to have some zip ties, so we found that buying these on Amazon is the least expensive route. So the zip ties that we have here are little 4-inch zip ties. You want to have a measuring tape of some sort. You want to have tin snips or some other type of wire cutter. Again, doesn't matter what you have. We're using these big ones today just because we have to do several of these. And then you are working with wire. These do get some sharp edges on there, so I like to use leather gloves just to make sure I'm not slicing and dicing my hands. So these are our materials. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how we're going to get all this together. First thing we need to do is we need to get this guy unraveled. So I did grab some basic little wire snips. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this guy unraveled. Usually there's just a couple of little pieces that they kind of fold over on the inside, but I'm gonna get this unraveled, come back to you, and then we'll start measuring this out and showing you how that's done. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna lay this out. Now, obviously this is gonna wanna roll back in on itself, which is not necessarily a bad thing because we wanna make a circle, but for measuring purposes, it's easier to flatten this out. So I usually find that rolling it opposite of the direction that it wants to go will help. And what we're looking for is we want to measure out about 3 feet. All right, so 3 feet is right there. So I know this is my cutting point here. So what I'm going to do is cut on the outside of this. Again, tin snips are heavenly with this because they'll cut right through it, especially as you get down to these smaller ones. And you can see why you want wear the leather gloves, because right now this would love to slice my hand. Okay, so now I've got 3 feet worth of this cage. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna leave it just like that. I have 2 more trees that I need to get these around here this morning. So I'm gonna go ahead and measure off a couple more of these, and then we'll come back and show you how we get this installed. We have 3 of these cut, ready to go. So now what I have is I have one of my stakes. Again, you can use any type of stake in order to put this in the ground. We like the bamboo ones, but it doesn't really matter. We've used all different types. So whatever you have lying around, that's gonna keep it in place. We'll explain that here in a sec. But we did talk a little bit about that kind of gradiated horizontal wire that you've got here. You can see it's much smaller down here where your bunnies would be, and then it gets bigger as it goes up. So what we want to do now is we need to actually make this into a circle around the tree. So a tree like this, because it's a little wider at the top, this is an everbearing mulberry. We are going to go ahead and put this together around the tree. So I'm going to have Lori help me out here in just a second to get that installed. But the key with this is to make sure that obviously these smaller gradients, so the smaller spacing between the wires, is on the bottom as opposed to the top. Second thing is we use zip ties. Now the reason why we use zip ties as opposed to wires, you can actually use the little tabs that are left when you cut this fencing to attach to the other side. However, we found that you don't necessarily need that permanent attachment, because eventually you're going to take this off of the tree. And when you do, being able to basically just clip the zip ties and pull this back off this way makes it a lot easier. So let's say, for example, these are everbearing mulberries. This tree, we're here in April, this tree by the time we get to fall is going to be probably 3 or 4 times this size and almost as wide. So in case we don't get around to pulling these off and we forget and the tree itself is pushing through this, very easy to come back through, snip those zip ties and pull this back off. Anyhow, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get this around the tree and then talk to you a little bit about staking and how you want to get this staked in. Okay, so you can see that was super easy. Having a second person there was a big help, makes it a lot easier for you. But you can see we've got 3 zip ties on here, and that's plenty. If you wanted to add more, obviously go for it. You're welcome to do that. But one thing is, Lori slides in a little bit closer, you'll be able to see. So when you put this back together, it's kind of in an oval shape. Now, depending on the tree itself, so like looking at this one, it's real wide at the top. I might keep this as an oval. However, it's very easy to shape. So if you wanted to shape it kind of more round, you definitely can. And then what we typically do is just kind of, this is pretty muddy, we just watered. So we just kind of slide it down a little bit, down into the mud. That'll help hold this in place, and that's pretty well centered. Now what we also do is we stake it. So now the staking, the reason why we do this is obviously it's a small tree. The tree itself has a stake. That's just for one season and that'll come back out. But as far as the fence, this fence, especially if you have a really small tree, you may find that as the wind blows through it, especially if you get really strong winds, it'll actually blow and start to topple the tree over. So we definitely don't want to have that happen. And that's the reason why we use a secondary stake. So what we really look for here is we already know that our predominant winds come in this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stake it on this side. So all I do is kind of take it from an angle. I go through 2 different parts of the fencing, set it so that I've got this resting against this part of the fence, and looking down I've got it resting on the other side, and then all you'll do is basically just push it in. This will keep this cage from moving too much in the wind and potentially toppling your new tree. So whereas it may not necessarily look super nice with this sideways looking thing, it is very effective. You can also come back and clip this, which we probably will, because the idea obviously is to just have this stake in here for a season in order to keep bunnies from going inside. When it's all said and done, we're not going to have any issues with rabbits trying to get in and munch and gnaw on the trunk of our tree. So just want to thank you for joining us today. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. Questions or comments, leave those in the comment section down below. Instagram and Facebook, we post content there you won't see here on the YouTube channel. And our Amazon shop, I'll leave a link down in the description. That's a free, painless way to help support the channel. If you start with that link, it doesn't matter what you buy, you help to support us here. So just want to thank you for joining us today and remind you, if we can farm on the edge of nowhere, so can you.